Jo, should we start?
Okay.
Right. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series. My name is Chris, Operations Director at Civil Service College. If today is your first time joining our webinar series, you are very welcome, and I hope you will like it. And welcome back if you have been on our courses or webinars before. It's always good to see familiar faces and names on the attendance list. I can see from today's audience that we have people from 6 different central government departments, 2 local authorities, 6 outstanding bodies, and 1 overseas government. Last week, we ran a webinar on crisis communications with Mark Greeno. We talked about how leaders have been communicating during this pandemic and what lessons public bodies can learn from different crisis communications approaches. If you missed the webinar, you can watch the recording on our YouTube channel. Likewise, today, we will be recording this Impostor Syndrome webinar. We will email you the recording in a day or 2. For your colleagues who are unable to join us today, we will make the video available on YouTube later. If you have any questions for us, whether it's tech issues or regarding imposter syndrome, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will address those questions at the end at the Q&A section. I know our speakers has prepared the slides to be as interactive as possible, so when you are responding to Jo's questions or would like to leave a comment, please use the chat, and I can see people are already using that already. So let us begin. We are very pleased to have our experts trainer, Jo Clift, with us this morning. Jo started her career as a communications professional and subsequently worked in the heart of government for over 20 years. She was mainly at the Cabinet Office and has worked closely with many ministers over the years, such as Lord Peter Mandelson and Sir Oliver Letwin. She has worked on issues of strategy, ministerial PR, and high-level board appointment, such as leading the coalition government's ITC strategy, head of communications for the BSE inquiry, and creating a new model for corporate shared services across the Whitehall. Jo, now we're on imposter syndrome today. Could you tell us more about how we can banish imposter syndrome?
So welcome to everybody. I'm not quite sure, Chris, roughly how many people we've got today.
About over 100 people registered. So far we have about 62 people in the webinar right now. I think we'll be expecting more as we go on.
So welcome everybody. I think we've got a couple of people from overseas and a lot of people from the UK. And thank you for logging on. If you've got kids rushing around, please don't worry about that. So just before we get going, 1 or 2 practical things. We're going to try and make today as participative as we can, because that's the way I normally run this workshop. Obviously, doing it online, we have to do it within the constraints of the technology. My request of you is please do join in via the chat box. We're not recording the chat box, so that won't be part of the video that Chris sends out. So I will pose some questions during this morning's hour webinar, and it'd be great if you could participate by putting your thoughts in the chat box. Obviously, we can't respond to every comment in the chat box, but it'll give us a feel for how people are seeing the subject matter. And then questions for me to answer at the end. As Chris said, please put them in the Q&A. I know it's slightly complicated separating between the Q&A and the chat box, but we think that's the way it's going to run smoothest. So just a few things about the college before we start. So get back to the beginning. This is the tech when you're sharing slides is a little bit clunky. So the Civil Service College, based in central London, works with lots of different public sector organisations and also organisations who want to understand government. And also we do study tours for people from all over the world who come into London who want to know more about public administration and government. The categories of courses are, as you can see here on the slide, and for people on the phone, accountability and governance, leadership, professional development, policy, law and legal, media, data, digital and finance. And you can have those courses created for you bespoke within your organisation. We're based next to St James's Park, right in the heart of Whitehall and Westminster. So today's topic, how to banish the imposter syndrome. This is a taster of a course that we run at the Civil Service College. It's a day's course. So what I'm going to do this morning is introduce you to the concepts. As I said, make it as participative or interactive as possible, and give you some hints and tips that you can start to work on in your own time. So let's have a think about who might be suffering from the imposter syndrome. Now, all the people on this slide, a bit difficult for the people that are on the phone, but you'll get the hang of this in a minute. All the people on this slide have said at one time or another that they feel like they're suffering from the imposter syndrome, or they feel like a fraud, or they feel like they don't deserve their success. Could you try to identify one or two of those and put those names in the chat box before we say who they are? So Kate Winslet, Tom Hanks, Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, Lady Gaga, Serena Williams, Ryan Reynolds, very good. A lot of people get confused with Ryan Gosling. Emma Watson from the Harry Potter films, Meryl Streep, Jodie Foster. Excellent. I think we've got most of them there. So we'll take them from the top. No, so you see we've got a Ryan Gosling person, but we think it's Ryan Reynolds, but they're very similar. So from the top on the left, we've got Kate Winslet, Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Tom Hanks, Jodie Foster, the actress. Underneath Jodie Foster, we've got Meryl Streep. To her left, Lady Gaga. To her, the writer, Maya Angelou, and then the actor, Ryan Reynolds. And at the bottom, we've got Albert Einstein, the scientist. And very good, Joe Wall, you got Sheryl Sandberg. Sheryl Sandberg is the Chief Operating Officer at Facebook. So she's second in command at Facebook, and has also said that she suffers from the imposter syndrome. So what are we trying to say here? Imposter syndrome is very common, and in a way, that's a very helpful thing to know, because you should know, if you feel that you do suffer from this, that you're not in a boat on your own. It's quite a common experience. I've certainly talked to CEOs, very, very senior people within the public sector and outside the public sector, who've been very clear that in spite of their success, they do suffer from the imposter syndrome. And I suspect if you sat down with your colleagues at any level in your organisation, you would certainly find people who share these kind of experiences. So let's have a think. Let's start to hone in on when these kind of experiences happen. So have a little think to yourself, because the imposter syndrome is slightly different for each person. Think about where or when you experience the imposter syndrome. And if you're happy to, then if you could share something in the box, in the chat box, that would be fantastic. I will talk about my own experiences as well in a moment. So on promotion, I'm going for a new job, or considering going for a new job. Decision making. Qualified as a lawyer and felt like I might be identified as a fraud, but no rational reason for this. In senior meetings, attending high-level meetings. Prior to meetings with others, I worry I'll be exposed. Illness. Meetings with colleagues who have been in the role longer than myself, and I have an appraisal and told I'm doing well when I have been seconded into a new department at a higher grade. Always, around manage large meetings on subjects I don't know much about. Yeah, when things not going so well, confidence is knocked. Recently been promoted and struggle with confidence at senior management meetings. Whenever you are approaching a new experience for the first time. Yeah, that's a really helpful When challenged on decision, regardless of knowing it's right for the circumstances. I feel I will be found out. Attending meetings, worry I'll come across as stupid and people think, why would I get this job? A couple of weeks after the lockdown, as I'm the only civil servant. Oh my gosh. Only civil servant not working. Advising the senior management.
Someone earlier put when being interviewed by the media as well.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
When other people come up with ideas I think I should have had. Excellent. So that is really, really helpful. All of those are very common. So nobody has got an abnormal experience there at all. Let's start to have a little think about what the imposter syndrome means. So you don't feel that you belong, either in the room or in your role, perhaps in your organisation, in your seniority. Somebody said in the chat box that they became a lawyer and felt like a fraud. So it's something about not feeling that you have the right to be where you are. You lack confidence and feel that others are much better than you. So there's an inherent issue with the imposter syndrome, that you assume that others take priority over you. You assume that they know more. You assume that we should listen to them and not you. And that's a problem when it comes to the meetings that people are talking about. The diffidence that people have and the way they put themselves second and let other people take the stage compounds that issue of the imposter syndrome. And then that final point on this page, we diminish our successes and our achievements when we have the imposter syndrome, and we highlight our challenges and our difficulties. Just been illustrated by Karen, who says, I have a first-class degree and PhD from Cambridge and still feel like I'm an imposter. So if we have if we imagine a scales, we are not giving the proper weight to our successes and our achievements, and we're giving disproportionate weight to the things that we find difficult and the things that we find challenging. So it's always a question of perception in this situation. We're giving the wrong emphasis to the wrong things. Now, we don't have time here to go into the why people suffer from the imposter syndrome very much. Obviously, there are some themes that come through. Sometimes it's the way people grew up in their childhood and whether they had proper support at home and at school. Sometimes there are social mobility issues. So people say to me, I look around my organisation and I'm a qualified lawyer, but I'm the only person who looks like me and behaves like me and who dresses like me and who acts like me. And I just feel as a fish out of water. So sometimes it's just not feeling that you fit in with the people around you. And that could be for lots of reasons. And people have talked in the chat box about finding meetings if they're the only woman, difficult. That could be if you come from an ethnic minority. It could be that you don't feel that you're given equal weight and equal status in your organisation. And often these feelings kick in when it's a new situation and a new environment. So people in the chat box said, if I get promoted, if I have an appraisal, when I get a really good feedback, if I'm thinking of going for a job, these are all situations where the imposter syndrome really rears its head. Because if you're going for promotion, you have to see yourself in a different light and you have to promote yourself in a different light. And that's when the doubts and the negativity starts to set in. So those are some of the themes that come out when we're talking about the imposter syndrome. And then we're just going to go into a little bit more detail about the kinds of things that people say, because I think it's quite helpful. They say, I feel like a fraud. I feel like I'm getting away with it. And quite a few people have said that in the box. And I suspect if we sat down and asked them for evidence that they're a fraud, we probably wouldn't find anything. But it's that feeling that you don't really belong where you are. I don't deserve my role, my grade, my bonus, or the praise that I'm getting. If I don't get everything right, then I have failed. So there is a bit of a crossover in imposter syndrome between perfectionism and the imposter syndrome. And I often get people saying to me, I feel that I have to get everything right. And if I don't, then I've got everything wrong. And obviously this is a recipe for huge stress at work. And you'll often hear people who are quite competent and confident at work saying that mistakes are really important. The person who made a mistake never made anything is quite a good phrase to remember. Making mistakes or or not knowing things or getting things wrong or needing more information is the way we learn things. And it's really important not to feel that if we're given a piece of work, we suddenly have to know what it's all about and be able to fill in all the gaps. Making that effort and making those mistakes and going back and doing it again is how we learn. Everyone knows more than I do, very common in this syndrome. I'm not good enough is something that people say a lot. I shouldn't need to ask for support or help. Now we can see when it's written down like that, that makes no sense, but there's still a feeling that people have if they work in quite a pressured environment perhaps, or a very competitive environment, that they shouldn't need to get assistance and help and support and encouragement and information from others. If I try something new, I'm going to fail and be exposed. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later on, because one of the ways out of this feeling is by trying new things and by testing that muscle and moving out of your comfort zone. So if we only stay sort of in the sidelines and in the shadows, we never really find out what we're actually capable of. So we have to challenge our own assumptions. Okay, let's have a little look at people who don't suffer from the imposter syndrome. And sometimes it's quite helpful to think about people that you know, either in work or out of work, who you don't think suffer from this. And there might be bits of their behaviour or their actions or their phraseology or their body language that you want to emulate. So I would describe it as people who own their success and their skills and are comfortable with their weaknesses. So they don't feel they have to get everything right. They know they're not going to get everything perfect. I work with somebody who's very senior, and when the COVID crisis happened, she's running an organisation. And she said, I chose 3 priorities for my organisation that I felt would help us focus our work during this crisis. She said, I don't even know if they're the right 3 things, but I felt I had to identify 3 priorities for my organisation so that to guide us through the next few weeks and months. So it's this knowledge that we're not going to get everything perfect and we're not going to get everything right, but we're going to step into that environment anyway. I've got an example of somebody who I really do not think suffers from the imposter syndrome, and this is her. Would anybody like to guess or tell the others who this is? From the chat. Is anyone watching the Women's World Cup a few months ago? Yeah, correct, Stephen. Yes, correct, Fiona. So this is Megan Rapinoe, and she is captain of the US football team. She's a gay woman. Lucille, you can't see the slides. So it's a picture of a female footballer on the football pitch and she's looking towards her supporters, and she's got her arms outstretched. And it's a lady called Megan Rapinoe, who is captain of the US football team. She has a particular process that she goes through after she's scored a goal. Chris, somebody can't see the chat. Can you explain to people how to get on the chats?
I think when people choose who they write the chats to, make sure it says all panelists and attendees.
Okay.
This way, everyone should be able to see everyone's comments, because I noticed some of your comments are only to panelists. That means that only Jo and I can see them. Some of you have chose to share all your comments to all panelists and attendees. Yes, we can confirm that everyone is muted just for the smooth running of the webinar, so it doesn't take too much of the bandwidth. We make sure everyone's videos and audio are muted. You can only see Jo's and myself.
If you've got some techie questions, you could also put it in the Q&A for Chris, and he'll deal with it from there.
Yep, and I will reply to those questions behind the scenes.
So when Megan scores a goal, she runs over to her supporters and she creates this sort of shape with her body, which is basically taking the praise, accepting that she's a success, and enjoying her success. Now, I've obviously chosen quite an extreme example, but I think it's worth thinking about in terms of somebody who's enjoying what they're doing, enjoying the fact that she's good at what she's doing, and taking the praise, which is something a lot of people find difficult. And dealing with the imposter syndrome isn't about winning everything. It's not about being the best at everything, but it is about being able to bring your whole self to work. So it is about acknowledging that you are who you are, that you are getting a lot of things right, even if you're not getting everything right, and finding a way of patting yourself on the back when things do go well. Small steps, as we'll talk about later on. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples from my professional life when I have suffered from the imposter syndrome. I look back on my career, which started about 30 years ago, and I see lots of situations where I could have handled things differently, where I could have stood up to people more, where I could have applied for different roles, where I could have been better in interviews. And just two examples. One is, for quite a long time, I ran shared services policy in government. Quite a difficult job, a cross-departmental job, dealing with lots of senior stakeholders across government and also private sector suppliers. I used to get emails from headhunters quite a lot, and the emails would say, "Dear Jo, we've seen that you're involved in the shared services strategy and policy work in government. We've got a job in the private sector and shared services, and we wondered if you'd like to suggest anybody for that job." And at the time, I genuinely thought they wanted me to suggest people for that job. And of course, what headhunters do is they write to you because they're interested in you, but they want to be subtle about it in case somebody else is reading your emails. And I had no idea that they were actually saying to me, "Why don't you apply for this job in the private sector?" So that's one example. The second example is I went to a Microsoft conference in Seattle with a senior person in government. And I was running their private office at the time, so I was making all the arrangements. And at 9 o'clock one morning, he had a meeting with Bill Gates. And I made sure everything was sorted out, that the car was there, that the papers were there, blah, 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 blah. off they went, about 2 or 3 of the officials, to go and meet Bill Gates in his office at his Redmond, I think it's called. And about 2 hours later, I bumped into one of the officials, Alan, and he said to me, "But why didn't you come to the meeting with us?" And it had never occurred to me that as the private secretary, of course, I would be welcome at this meeting with Bill Gates, and I would have got to sit in Bill Gates' office and hear about what was going on. So that's 2 of my examples. And now for where we start to solve the problem. Anyone want to tell me what they think this represents in the chat box? Yeah, it's the fairy godfather. So that's Marlon Brando, who played the godfather in the movie, representing the fairy godfather. I was trying to find a gender neutral image of a fairy godmother, so I went with the fairy godfather. Is there a fairy godfather or godmother, do you think, who's going to sort this out for you on a day by day, week by week basis? Correct, Charles. So there's no magic wand, and I'm going to try and help you understand some of the tools and techniques that you can use. One of the analogies that I think is worth thinking about is that if you wanted to run 5K, one of the things you might do is download the app, the 0 to 5K app that the NHS have done. But downloading the app wouldn't actually get you to run 5K. You have to get out and you have to practice and you have to do it on a regular basis, and you have to build up that strength and that stamina and that confidence that you can run. And this is the same. You have to practice and you have to build a muscle. And my advice is that you start small and you grow from there. So we're going to talk about how you can take on smaller challenges in order to grow into those bigger challenges. So how can you challenge your imposter syndrome? So we've got about 15 more minutes and then we're going to take questions. And if you've got any questions, if you could put them in the Q&A box, and then Chris can start collating them for us. Get feedback. So one of the things that people with imposter syndrome tend to get a bit nervous about, depending on the individual, but it's quite common, is getting feedback. So they'll wait for their appraisal and then they'll be very nervous about getting the feedback. It's quite important to challenge that and get regular feedback, and not just get feedback from the people that you think are going to give you all the answers you want. Start with supportive people and then start with the people that you think are going to challenge you a little bit. But you'll be very surprised, I think, how positive a lot of the feedback is. Document your skills. So this is proper work, and we talk about this quite a lot on the course. This is about actually sitting down and naming what your skills are and naming them in a positive way, and we're going to have a practice at that in a minute. This is where you start to build up those foundations that hold you in good stead when you're at the difficult meetings, when you're with difficult stakeholders, when you feel that you're outnumbered by people who don't want to listen to your point of view. You've got to sit down and document what you're good at. Share your thoughts, feelings, and difficulties. So as we have covered a little bit, lots of people struggle with some of these feelings. So try and find people that can be your allies and your supporters, and to a certain extent your challengers as well, and share your thoughts and feelings and difficulties with them. Celebrate your successes and share them with others. Louisa is saying that it's hard to believe the good feedback. I think you have to practice believing the good feedback. That's another thing, another muscle that you have to grow. Sometimes I've kept a document of the positive feedback I've got, or I've kept an email file of the positive feedback I've got, or a physical file. So it's something that you actually have to take on. And then there's the areas where I would encourage you to push yourself out of your comfort zone. So to say yes when you feel like saying no. So we had somebody much earlier on who said, I want to apply for promotion, or I want to apply for another job, and my imposter syndrome is kicking in. Well, the only way you're going to test yourself is by applying for that job or applying for that promotion. That means you have to put yourself through the application process, you have to put yourself through the interview. You may or may not be successful, but just by putting your best foot forward, you will have stretched that muscle. So putting yourself out of your comfort zone is a key tool. Asking yourself, what is the worst that can happen? So if you do speak up in that meeting, or you do challenge that colleague, or you do write that report that you've been fearful about writing, ask yourself, what is the worst that can happen? A lot of imposter syndrome sufferers also struggle with catastrophizing. So they think, well, if I do that wrong, the sky's going to fall in. And of course, the sky isn't going to fall in. You're just going to get a bit of feedback if it doesn't quite go to plan, and then you carry on the next day. And then we've referenced this, speak up when you feel like playing small. So that's a fantastic muscle to grow. So when you're sitting in that meeting thinking, why are people repeating my points and getting all the praise and attention? Force yourself to speak up. That's the way to change that. Another couple I would suggest are behave as though you are important. So there's a very good Amy Cuddy video, TED Talk, about fake it to make it. So you go into a situation where you don't feel confident, but you behave as though you feel confident. And that pushes you into a new situation. So somebody wants the yes line again. Say yes when you feel like saying no to opportunities. So it's about taking those chances when they come up, and not playing small is my main point. Okay. So a little bit of theory to take with you. When we're talking about these scenarios and meetings where we feel intimidated and we feel like a small person, what's normally happening is that we've gone into the room, or we've gone into the situation, the meeting, the conference, whatever it is, and we've put ourselves in the child mode. What we've done with the other stakeholders, the people that we feel are more important to us, is that we've put them into the parent mode. And that means that we don't get a good quality of interaction, and we don't get a good quality of discussion, and we've diminished ourselves. We've put us back into the shadows. So does anyone want to put into the chat box what sort of interaction we're aiming for in those situations? Yeah. Yeah. So adult to adult, interacting as equals, adult to adult. This is a really helpful piece of theory. Also, again, needs practice. But my suggestion is that wherever you are, I don't really discriminate between whether you're meeting the minister or the head of your organisation or your boss's boss. Everybody should be interacting in an adult to adult way. That's the way you have good fair, equal interactions with each other. As soon as you put somebody on a pedestal, then you're putting yourself in a lower position to them. And that creates a disparity in how you feel about yourself as against how you feel about the other person in the room. So try and hold on to this image of the adult to adult, especially for people who get a bit tongue-tied in senior meetings. You know, these people who are senior now, you know, 3 or 4, 5, 6 years ago, they were the same grade that you are, or 10 years ago, whatever it is. They've had to go through all these parts of the journey as well. So really, really focus on adult to adult. Yeah, and Delaney says that Amy Cuddy's book Presence is really helpful. I agree with that. So, a little bit of work. I want you to think about one of your key skills. And I want it to be something that you enjoy doing and that you feel confident about. And it's not relevant whether it's a skill that you use in work or a skill out of work. It's just a skill that you have, that you enjoy, and that you feel that you can really sort of hang your hat on. And you must be able to commit to having this skill. That's the important thing. And then I want you to articulate it in a sentence.
I think that's not true.
Yeah. Let's go back. Doesn't like this slide. So, if you wanted to say, I'm a really good project manager, your sentence should not read, I'm an okay project manager. Your sentence should read, I'm a great project manager. I'm very organised and able to communicate clear goals and build excellent relationships with people. So I want you all to think about one sentence, please. Something that you really know that you do well and that you enjoy doing. And ideally, I'd like you to commit that to the chat box because it helps with your sense of commitment and worth. I'm good at relationship building. I'm a great people manager. I am very good at presenting a persuasive argument. I communicate from the heart and I'm straightforward and tell the truth. And yeah, I'm innovative and think outside the box. I'm excellent interpersonal skills. I'm organised. Sal, I think we can do a bit better that I'm organised. I am very organised. I'm good at opening up conversations with people. I'm warm and welcoming to new people and I build relationships easily. I'm good at explaining finance information to non-finance personnel. I'm a good problem solver. Very good planner. I'm super organised. Excellent. I am very much a people person, enabling me to build positive and productive working relationships. I'm a great learner. I always want to make my mates skillful as much as possible. I take an active interest in others and this helps to build relationships. I'm bilingual. I'm a strong manager. I care about people, listen attentively and empathise. I'm good at Sal's coming again. I am very good at organising myself. I'm good at gleaning information from others and adapting it to help most situations. I'm great at seeing a need for something and setting it up. These are fantastic. Very, very good. I'm a great writer. Excellent. So these are not only well articulated skills, but they're skills that every organisation is in great need of. I'm great at learning and passing on what I have learnt to do. One other lens to look at this through is that when you go into these meetings and you feel a bit outnumbered and a bit intimidated, remember that not all the people around the table have got the same skills that you have. You bring skills to the table that they don't. And this is why it's really important to think about your skills, to document them, to hold on to them, to write them down. Innovative, fantastic stakeholder management skills. Excellent. So lots of fantastic people skills, team skills, management skills, planning skills. Helena, I am a great writer. Okay. Final bit of sort of practical thinking before we go on to the Q&A. I'd like you to be able to walk away from this with a sort of a small start of a plan for how you can take the next step on this journey. I know journey is a bit of an overused word, although apparently we might not be seeing Strictly Come Dancing this autumn, so we might be hearing less about the journey. But I want you to think about where your imposter syndrome is likely to kick in. And the more specific you can be, the better. So think about where it might happen, who is in the room, when is it happening? And then I want you to think about how you might behave slightly differently. The sort of things you might say, or the kind of body language you might adopt, or the kind of preparation you might do for the meeting, or the sort of interactions you might have in that meeting. And think about one thing that you think you could do differently in that situation. Just one thing that you think would make you feel a bit more on solid ground and a bit less intimidated and a bit less one down in the situation. So just one thing. The first challenge is to identify where you think you're going to be in the situation. Where is your imposter syndrome likely to be triggered? And then one very practical thing that you can do. It could be as simple as I'm going to sit in a different place in the meeting, or I'm going to sit forward in my chair, or I'm going to make sure that I speak rather than just letting everybody else speak. So if you could think about how you're going to challenge yourself and then add something in, that would be great. Toz, that's great, but can you be a bit more specific about the meeting that you're in? Just try and be a bit more planned about it, so you know how you can take this next first step. Esther, excellent. I will aim to speak first in team meetings. Senior management is there. Rebecca, going to check her understanding of meetings before the meeting ends. In an online meeting, I will not wait to be asked to speak. Yep. That was Laura. Delaney, with smart people, I'm going to remain confident in my role that I don't need to be a subject matter expert. Exactly. In interviews, I will confident in delivering my skill set and why they need these skills. Excellent. at leadership meetings share my views and thoughts and share the work I am doing and not thinking that I shouldn't have a voice. Louisa, Thomas. So you're going to think more before you go back to your customers. Excellent. When working with experts, I should not avoid the issue that I sometimes don't know and ask them to explain it. Very good, Helen. Sophie, I will be less aware of others and more aware of myself. Fantastic. Sophie, I think it's good to think about how you're going to do that as well. So is it through your body language or your breathing or what you say or a combination of those? Okay. So thank you very much for sharing those. Sally Ann, not be afraid to challenge. My thought that I want to leave you with before we go on to questions is this. Feelings are not facts. So if you go into a meeting or you go into a situation and you start to feel one down, or you start to feel inadequate, or you start to feel that you don't know what you're talking about, that's a feeling. And one of the key ways out of this imposter syndrome is to delineate between feelings and facts. So try and put the feelings on one side and look at the facts. And as some of you have articulated in the last couple of minutes, you don't have to be the subject matter expert in a room of subject matter experts. You're there to do your job, they're there to do their job. So thinking that you have to have the same knowledge as everybody else is a feeling, it's not based in reality. Okay, Chris, we've got some time for questions.
Right, yeah. So if everyone could submit your questions in the Q&A feature, then I can read them out. I think, Jo, this last slide is very important. I remember reading someone's commented in the chat that the person works for a regulator and often get pressurized by the stakeholders to make a decisions immediately on the opinion on their proposal. But I think, like you said, if based on facts, that then the person should be working, taking their time, analyze the proposal, and give the appropriate response back to the stakeholders. And I think it relates back to what I saw earlier, that some people say is about speaking from the mind, being authentic, isn't it? That being authentic to what you are good at, what your role is, so you don't have that feelings that you might not be capable. Or is that true? How does it link to authenticity?
It is linked to authenticity, but it's also linked to what you described in terms of not responding to pressure. So civil servants are often put in a situation where they're asked for something very quickly, where they don't have all the information, where they're asked to give a sort of bit of a binary answer for an issue that isn't an A or B answer. And it's important to be able to stand your ground. You know, that is the job of a civil servant. It's not easy being a civil servant. If you haven't got all the information, or you haven't got the answer, or you haven't been able to ascertain if it's a yes or a no, it's really important to be able to say that. And I think that is about being authentic, but it's also knowing that it's not your job to sort of pluck facts out of the air.
Mm-hmm. Great. One of the participants asked, has the imposter syndrome been explored in relations to personality types, such as Myers-Briggs personality types?
I don't know if it's been explored in relationship to Myers-Briggs. I mean, a couple of people have identified in the chat box that they also suffer from anxiety. So I think there's a crossover with sort of people who feel quite vulnerable. But it has been shown that it's not particularly linked just to self-esteem. There's not a sort of causal link between self-esteem and imposter syndrome. So there's a lot that's not really known about it. There was a fascinating study done where they interviewed people who'd been accepted into university in America. And the ones with imposter syndrome felt that they'd been sent the wrong letter, giving them access to the university course. So it was quite a sort of, quite an imprinted thing that they just didn't feel that they had the right to be there. But I think this, to call it science would be a bit of a step too far, I think.
Mm. And then
shall I respond to Nicola? Nicola, this says this is part of the longer course. Could you give her? So we go into a bit more depth about what imposter syndrome is. We have a lot more time for dealing with the specific situations where you're facing imposter syndrome and helping you to unravel those and find coping mechanisms for that, and perhaps role playing what you might do differently in those situations. We do a fair amount of group work, so people get to learn from each other, with coaching from me. So I try and make it interactive, like I've made today interactive, but we get time to do more breadth and more depth, and help people with an action plan, really.
Jo, Diane asks, is the imposter syndrome just a British phenomenon? Now we talk about British culture is always about being humble, not bragging. So is this something that's quite unique to the British culture?
I'm not sure about that, because there's lots of people who feel that they can own their successes in the workplace. So I think it tends to be more sort of personality driven. Even in the UK, it tends to be more about how comfortable you are speaking up, more about whether you are okay taking the space and owning what you actually know. So the recommendation for a book. Why don't we, Chris, why don't I send the reference to the Amy Cuddy video and the Amy Cuddy book and one other book? I can do that when we send the slides out.
Yeah, sure. So we can do that. Someone asked about, so we have to be careful our emotions then. I think it's asking to what degree do we look after our own emotions?
What does the question actually say?
So the exact wording is, so we have to be careful about our emotions then.
Yeah, a couple of things on that. One is that everybody has emotions and we'd be pretty mad if we didn't. But I think there's a difference between understanding your emotions and being driven by them. So if you know you're going to be nervous or at an interview or in a meeting or in a one-to-one setting, then it's about trying to dial back on the negative side of that emotion. So the side of that emotion that's telling you that you're not going to be able to speak, that you're not going to be able to represent your experience if it's a job interview, and try and walk into the situation with the best kind of energy that you can. It's not about saying, I'm not going to feel nervous. I was nervous before this webinar. I had a dream that every single thing that could go wrong did go wrong. So it's not about not having emotions. It's about trying to put them in their place and say, yes, okay, I feel nervous, I feel anxious, but I still want to represent my experience, my skills, my knowledge, my understanding, and I'm going to try and keep focused forwards on that and not be driven by my emotions.
I mean, you mentioned about kind of the fear is like you've been nervous during a webinar, which also happens to me when I have to do a webinar or addressing people in front of like 50 people or 100 people. I do get those negative emotions as well. But what about positive emotions such as getting praise, commended for your achievement? How can people accept those? Because those are often quite hard. Like someone at the beginning of the webinar said, I find it hard to believe those praises.
Yeah, and then that fits in with what Sal has asked in the chat box, which is how do you find that balance between humble and overly confident?
Mm.
So if somebody gives you praise, I think the best thing is to sort of pause and breathe and try and experience it, and not try and say, oh, well, it was my colleagues who did all the work, or it was just a simple report that I wrote, or anybody could have done it. Try and take it in. And if it's not feeling meaningful, you could say, you know, what was it specifically that you thought was good about what I did? So you could try and unpack it and get more information. You could say, you know, I find receiving praise quite difficult, so I'm trying to take it in, and the more you could tell me about it, the more it might feel easier for me to understand it. I think to Sal's point about humble and overly confident, I think the overly confident is something that it doesn't actually come across. It's just a fear that people feel they're going to come across as overly confident. And I suppose that is a slight cultural difference, particularly sort of between the UK and the US, that we aren't encouraged to own our successes and own our achievements and do a sort of Megan Rapinoe when we score a goal and smile at our supporters and say, well, that was great, wasn't it? Wasn't I brilliant? So culturally, perhaps we do have to work against that a bit, but this isn't about shouting out and saying I'm so brilliant and everybody's not brilliant, everybody else is not brilliant. It's just saying I'm owning the things that I'm good at, I'm owning the things that I know I bring to the party, and I'm proud of those things that I bring to the party.
I agree. Culturally, definitely there's differences. For someone, for myself, who comes from a Asian heritage, there's that we need to respect people who are more mature than us. Whatever they say, you know, they are usually correct. So someone my age always having doubts about what I say. My answer is it always correct? Is it actually correct? Now, apart from culture, what about between women and men? Someone asked, are women more likely than men to have imposter syndrome?
Women are talk to me more about finding those meetings with senior stakeholders difficult. But on the courses, it's not kind of discriminating between, in terms of participants, we get almost as many men as we get women on the courses. So I think people would be surprised how many men do suffer from the imposter syndrome. In an organisation, the dynamic can be set up, not always consciously, to support men, and that can be very excluding for women, and I've experienced that myself. But in terms of people who are willing to talk about it, I find it's more balanced than I expected. Shall we do the last couple of slides, just because some people might want to leave?
Yeah, I think we would just do a quick summary. I think for those who have not, couldn't have time to answer your questions, perhaps if I could ask Jo to probably address these questions in a separate platform.
Oh, well, I could do the last couple of questions and then I can hang on, that we can hang on for longer. Sorry, do the last couple of slides and then I can hang on and answer more questions.
I think that would be very useful.
Okay, so we'll for people who want to stay, we'll carry on for a few minutes afterwards. Those are my details for anyone who wants to keep in touch with me, and I publicise the Civil Service College courses on there as well. A couple of courses that we've got coming up: Impostor Syndrome next month, also Impostor Syndrome in October, Assertiveness for Women also in October, and Strategic Planning for an Uncertain Future. Certainly a lot of uncertain futures going on. To answer your question, Tomasz, everything before the summer is virtual. and then we will, I think, reassess based on what's happening with government guidance during the summer. But everything certainly before the August break is currently virtual, if I've understood it correct.
Correct. Hopefully these sessions in October and September, we can deliver them as a face-to-face format.
Okay, so as we said there, you can design your own courses as well. And if you want to find more of these webinars, that's the email to register with. So let's just pick up a couple of questions before everybody has to go. I know
So
people have to line up, have to come up now.
I can see quite a lot of people are still online right now. So I'll just pick a few more questions. Tracy asks, how do you maintain precision if you feel there's collusions between subject matter experts who disregard your contribution?
This is a slightly longer topic, I think, but some people use sort of the broken record technique, which is that you then go back and say, yes, I've understood what you said, but I still think we need to talk about A, B, and C. So you keep coming back to your point. If people know they're going to get a difficult time in a meeting, some people try and do some of that lobbying and influencing work before the meeting, so they're not feeling as much heat and not feeling as sort of put on the spot in real time. Or people who find it difficult to sort of put verbal arguments together might send an email around beforehand, or might send an email around afterwards saying, I don't really feel that we covered A, B, and C. So it depends on what your kind of skill set is, really. But persistence, I think, is most important.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the attendees asked, how do you differentiate imposter syndrome from actual incompetence or inability, etc.? I think the question is really asking, how can you identify an area that needs further development, professional development, compared to just putting it under imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I mean, you have to become quite an expert on your own skill set, and obviously that means you have to get feedback as well. So it's nobody's going to be good at everything. The imposter syndrome is about trying to identify what you are good at so that you can hold on to that, but equally feeling that you've understood where you've got development needs and weaknesses, and not feeling as though they mean that you're not sort of okay to be in the room. You have to be honest with yourself and say, well, you know, I'm good at this, but I'm not good at that. That's also about being authentic and bringing your whole self to work. And if you are unsure, then I think it's good to get feedback. And so you could talk to people and say, well, these are the things that I think I'm really strong on, and these are the things I think I need to be better at, and get feedback on that. But of course, and then there are always going to be one or two people who are just deluded and think they're great at everything. And we all know that that's not true. But I think this is more subtle.
I'm quite conscious of our time. If we could just have one final question, Jo, is that okay?
Yeah.
If you have time. Now, I think so far we discussed about what we can do, how we can look at our own emotions, what we can do in meetings or workplace. But for, let's say, our managers who don't have the imposter syndrome, what can a managers do to help the team members who have imposter syndrome to get all the support he or she might need?
I think the first step would be to encourage them to talk about it, and then to challenge where you think they've got the wrong end of the stick. So if they sort of say, well, I'm not good at team working, and you think they are good at team working, find evidence to challenge that. But so it's about having a dialogue and a conversation, and sort of getting to know each other, really.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that some people do is they have that kind of dialogue, but within a team, so that you can start to celebrate each other's successes. And then as you get to trust each other more, you can start to maybe say, well, you know, Jo, I think you ought to have got more support when you wrote that report, because you just did it all on your own, and then you put yourself under a lot of pressure. And But I think it's good to start off with the support and celebrating what you think other people do well. So it doesn't just have to be the line manager, it can be the whole team.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think even within CSC, because we have our UK training and international training, so we do encourage our team members to share each other's any good news that we receive, especially now we're working from home, like quite distant from each other, like sharing good news actually keeping the morale up, and I think it's quite useful for this as well. I think that's all the time we have today. Thank you very much for everyone attending, and thank you very much, Jo, for delivering such an interesting sessions for us. A lot of people have commented that it's really useful, a lot of food for thought. For those who are still remain online, we're just going to launch a poll. Just want to see how people find whether if people find it useful or not. So it's a multiple choice question, so you could say whether it's very useful, useful, okay, not useful, or not relevant. Be as honest as possible, so we can take on the feedback and see what else that we can do to improve the webinars. We do run a weekly webinars now, so do follow us on social media or join our mailing list, so you know all the latest news on what we offer at Civil Service College. Jo, do you have any final food for thoughts before we say goodbye to everyone?
I wanted to thank people for joining in on the chat, which I really appreciated and made it much better experience for me, because it's hard not seeing people in real life. And also to acknowledge that we've got, you know, mostly civil servants on the call. It's a very stressful time for everybody in, you know, the UK and wider, but it's also a tough time for civil servants having to negotiate a lot of what's going on at the moment in uncharted waters. So thank you for the work that you do in difficult circumstances, and good luck with flexing your new muscles.
Yep. That's it for today. Stay safe, everyone, and keep up with the social distancing. So hopefully we will get through this difficult time very soon. And I'm sure everyone benefited from seeing each other's comments. So I think it's very key for us to continue talking with each other. There's so much that we can learn from each other. So do keep it up. And hopefully we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.